was easy to see then, and it's very much easy to see now, that the 1998 release of the Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64 was really a landmark event. The game, really successfully took what had traditionally been kind of a top-down 2D series, and it, kind of remade it for the polygonal generation. And it did so, incredibly well, establishing a lot of really great gameplay systems that many other games have used as a result of the success of the game. Now, we're getting The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker for the GameCube. And it's really more of a follow-up to the Ocarina of Time than anything else, kind of reusing a lot of those same gameplay systems, but moving everything a step forward. But what really sets The Wind Waker apart from the Ocarina of Time, or really any other game on the market today, is just the high level of polish and production value that goes into the game. The game takes place in a huge water-filled land that is also comprised of a series of islands. You start out on Outset Island, and you're a kid kind of coming of age, and it's your birthday. The tradition on the island is that on this specific birthday, you kind of don the green clothes of the hero of time, who's actually Link from the Ocarina of Time. So you get these clothes, you walk around looking like Link. Shortly thereafter, a bird kind of flies in, this giant bird carrying this small girl, and the bird's being tailed by a pirate ship who's kind of trying to shoot the bird out of the sky. It eventually succeeds, shooting the bird, getting the girl to drop. A few events take place, and the short of it is that your kid sister gets kidnapped by the bird and taken away. So you, being the kind of a young adventurer type, take up the challenge to get her back, and you team up with the pirates who agree to give you a lift to go after the bird. From there, of course, things expand, and the game actually begins at that point to kind of tie back into the kind of the classical Zelda storyline. You'll see a lot of kind of familiar themes from the previous games in the series. You'll even see some familiar locations and characters. And of course, as you might expect, as the game reaches its final conclusion, the very fate of the world does eventually hang in the balance. You control this game very much the same way you controlled the Ocarina of Time. A lot of the controls are pretty much identical. Combat's very similar. The way the inventory works is also the same. You go to a sub-screen, you can assign your various inventory items to any one of 3 inventory buttons. The Z-trigger targeting from Ocarina of Time is now replaced by L-trigger targeting. And, basically the game is very easy to pick up and play for people who've been either playing the bonus disc or just brushed up on their Ocarina of Time skills. Kind of the major change to combat is that there's been an addition of a new kind of counter move. Basically, when an enemy goes to strike, you'll be able to input kind of a timing-based command that will roll around the enemy and get at his back. Much of the Wind Waker takes place out on the open sea. You'll get a boat fairly early on. That boat is actually a pretty talkative boat called the King of Red Lions. And the King of Red Lions will pretty much kind of tell you where to go. He'll mark spots on your map to kind of give you a pointer of where in the world you need to be going to progress with your quest. And along the way, you'll get a lot of various items. A lot of these items are, lifted straight from every other Zelda game. You'll see a lot of the familiar items here, like the boomerang, bombs, hook shot, bow and arrow. The Master Sword, of course, eventually plays a fairly major role because it wouldn't be a Zelda game if it didn't. And you also see some new items. There's a grappling hook that'll actually let you grapple onto targets and swing back and forth. And in some cases, you can actually climb the rope a bit to get to various locations that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get to. You'll also find the Deku Leaf. And this kind of acts as like a hang glider or parachute. Basically, when you're airborne and you use it by either jumping off of something or falling off a ledge or something, Link will actually hold it over his head and he'll be able to glide around. That's good for covering a lot of long distances. You can really kind of cover some ground fast with that. On the ground, though, you can use the Deku Leaf to actually blow gusts of wind at objects or enemies. He'll kind of flap it like that at them. And that's very useful for beating specific types of foes. The game also has the Wind Waker itself, which essentially replaces the Ocarina from the Ocarina of Time. The Wind Waker is a conductor's baton, and when you use it, you'll see a musical staff kind of pop up, and you'll have to hold in different directions to actually conduct various songs. As you go through the game, you'll learn a few different songs, and some of these are very useful. One of them will turn day into night and back again. One will let you warp around to different spots on the map, which is very useful because the sailing itself can actually grow pretty tedious if you have to sail, all the way across the map to get somewhere. So the warp song, definitely takes a lot of the tedious nature of sailing out of the game completely. You'll also be able to control the direction of the wind, which is very, very important in the game. Having the Wind Waker right in the title, wind does play a pretty major role throughout. Especially when sailing, you'll have to make sure that the wind is blowing with you to make sure that you can get there as fast as possible. And some of the game's other puzzles, jumping off of stuff, you want to make sure that if you're going to be gliding somewhere that the wind is with you. So the Wind Waker really kind of comes into play just as much as the Ocarina did in Ocarina of Time. It would be incorrect to call the Wind Waker a difficult game. The game is actually quite easy in most of its segments. None of the game's dungeons ever get really as devious as the Water Temple did in Ocarina of Time, which really made you had to kind of think spatially to make sure you were going to the right place and doing the right thing. These dungeons do have their own sets of puzzles, and some of them get a little tricky, but never the sort of frustrating, like, oh, what do I got to do next, sort of stuck sort of puzzle that you'll encounter in other games. The game's boss fights also follow the classic Zelda formula. Basically, you'll enter a dungeon. Over the course of progressing to the end of that dungeon, you'll acquire an item, and then you'll use that new item to defeat the boss. So the boss patterns are fairly straightforward, and your character is pretty nimble, so you can really kind of hop out of the way of things pretty easily. And given the tight nature of the control, combat is really a breeze here as well. So none of the boss fights are particularly challenging. Of course, the final confrontation, a multi-staged boss battle, does kind of up the ante a little bit. It is a little bit more difficult, but even that is surprisingly easy to get through. People that are experienced with the Ocarina of Time control scheme, thanks to that bonus disc that Nintendo put out, or people that are up on how to play the game right off the bat, are going to be able to breeze through the game pretty easily. It's the sort of game where there are a lot of optional things that you can do to go out and get things like bottles, which you can use to store medicine and fairies, or you can collect a lot of treasure maps, which sometimes lead to pieces of heart, so you can just increase your life meter.